So, assessment planning. I think that people often come with a particular referral concern, and I treat that as a starting point, but it's not necessarily the whole picture. In the setting that I do clinical work in, we often ask families to complete a developmental questionnaire before the first appointment, and this can include information about current concerns, developmental history, schooling, health, family history, any previous intervention and support, and current functioning. What's life like day to day for the child and the family. If possible, teachers' questionnaires can be really valuable. Intake interviews with the young person and their caregivers can help clarify referral concerns. Sometimes we might receive work samples or school reports or previous assessment reports from a wide range of other health professionals, such as speech therapists, occupational therapists, paediatricians, other psychologists and guidance counsellors. This also might be a moment where you would consider administering perhaps a broad spectrum screener, such as the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, just to gain a bit more information about what might be going on for this young person. In Alex's case, the parents request a learning assessment after the school reports concerns with literacy and numeracy. However, during the intake process and also in a teacher background form, there are also some concerns emerging around attention, hyperactivity and impulsivity. After a discussion with Alex's parents, we decide to explore the learning concerns, but also add in a screener, the Vanderbilt Parent and Teacher Scales, to screen for ADHD-related behaviours and impact on the child. Oops, sorry. So, in terms of assessment itself, we have different kinds of tools, and the tools that you have might be somewhat related to your profession. As psychologists, we have a number of performance-based tests. This is looking at what can the child do under structured and controlled conditions. Examples might be cognitive and academic testing, language assessment, memory processing, or sort of performance-based executive functioning tasks. Rating scales and screeners gather reported behaviours, symptoms, experiences, or functional impact, and they can be particularly useful because they allow us to gather information from outside the one-to-one assessment session. It again gives us that day-to-day impact. Parents, teachers, tutors, other health professionals, and the young people themselves may all provide important perspectives. Common areas include ADHD, anxiety, autism, executive functioning, adaptive functioning, or wellbeing screeners. Our own observations are also part of the assessment. We observe attention. We see how a child might persist on tasks, how fatigued they become doing certain activities. We can see anxiety, impulsivity, or problem-solving style and response to feedback. A key part of interpretation is integrating these performance-based scores, the rating scales, and our own observations with all the other information that we have. For the case study for Alex, the assessment plan includes a cognitive measure, an academic achievement measure, and the Vanderbilt parent and teacher rating scales. The Vanderbilt allows us to gather information across both the home and the school setting. Something else to consider during administration, and something that I know I was a little bit uncertain about before I started working with young people, was how do I connect with the child? How do I engage with them for the assessment? Assessment's not just a set of tasks. If we're using performance-based measures, the young person really needs to be able to work with us. I'm always open to new ideas and actually get a lot of great ones from some of the students that I supervise. But after many assessments with children and young people, I remain really in awe by how often young people do engage with difficult tasks. They're often not doing activities that are fun for them. They're often doing things that they find tricky or effortful, or closely related to the areas where they already feel less confident. some of the things that I've sort of come up with to consider about, maintaining engagement include that preparation phase, so preparing the child and the family before the assessment session. It can be useful to provide, for example, a handout to parents or caregivers to help them explain in child-friendly language the assessment before they turn up for the appointment. It's not ideal for a child to discover on the day that they are missing school, or even worse, the school holidays, to come along and work with a stranger on activities that might be difficult for them. Preparation might also include explaining where they're going, who they're going to meet, whether the parent can stay nearby, whether they can, have a break for a snack or a drink, and also that what we're doing isn't like a school test. I would often tell children that it's not possible to get everything right on these tasks, and that the purpose is just to understand how they like to learn and how they like to solve problems. When I meet the young person, I try to explain the assessment in clear and concrete language. For example, we'll be doing a few different activities today. Some will be a bit like schoolwork, some will be more like problem solving, and I'm interested in how you approach them so that we can understand what helps you learn. Rapport can be built in many ways. In some settings, that might involve a whole session to build rapport, and you might play games, do colouring or other activities linked to the child's interests. In my current setting, we don't always have enough time for a separate rapport building session, so I usually keep it simple. I talk with the young child or young person directly, keep things fairly low key, and try and make the interaction warm and reassuring. I think that sometimes what can be really helpful in building rapport is just having the person that you're working with know that you're actually genuinely curious about them, and that young people are good at picking up on that sort of authenticity. During a session, you might want to consider how you structure it. Do you use a lot of breaks? Some children really benefit from planned breaks, and sometimes it's really hard to have to keep coming back to non-preferred tasks after too many breaks. So keep that in mind when planning breaks. Visual progress can help. You might have a whiteboard where you can mark off each activity and the child can see how much is left to go. And movement where possible. Supporting engagement, I think it's good to remember you can support engagement while also maintaining standardised administration. You can still have fun, you can still chat, you can still joke, while also delivering standardised administration. With rating scales, you might want to consider how you're going to complete those rating scales. Some young people might be able to complete a written scale independently. Others may need it read aloud or administered more like an interview. I think for shorter measures, some clinicians could creatively build movement into responses, such as having a whiteboard with the different responses as targets and throwing a soft ball at the right answer. I think that could be more realistic for a 10-item measure rather than a really long scale. But there's lots of options for engaging with young people. And as I said, I'm often amazed at just how many young people do come along and complete fairly comprehensive assessments. With going back to our case study, to Alex, you may be familiar with some of the measures that are indicated up here, but if not, this is a brief overview of the assessment results from Alex's assessment. I would, when learning's a question, generally complete a cognitive assessment, looking at, yes, full-scale IQ, but also other aspects of reasoning, problem solving, and processing information. And for Alex, things are looking very much as expected for Alex's age overall. However, as you can see, there is a little bit of difference between the domains here. Alex shows age-appropriate reasoning skills, including for verbal comprehension, visual, spatial, and fluid reasoning, Working memory, however, is an area that looks like it's a fair bit trickier for Alex. Working memory involves holding information in mind and manipulating it. It's relevant to tasks such as solving mental maths problems, following multi-step instructions, and keeping track of ideas while reading or writing. On academic testing, Alex is also fairly close to the expected range for their age in several areas, but reading comprehension and fluency are more challenging, and essay writing is also an area that Alex struggled with a fair bit. These results suggest to me that learning concerns are present, but there's not one highly specific academic pattern coming through that, is clearly explaining all of the reported difficulties for Alex in the classroom. My behavioural observations during the assessment are also important. Alex is frequently off task and needs redirection to get back to the task. Alex is fidgety, uses a wobble stool, and sometimes gets up and moves around the room. Alex benefits a lot from repetition of instructions and loses focus as task demands increase. It's harder and harder to get Alex to come back to the tasks after breaks. So, the Vanderbilt screeners results are summarised on this screen. The Vanderbilt is really looking through and asking about indicators of ADHD, both inattentive and hyperactive impulsive subtypes. And on the Vanderbilt, in fact, in the DSM, when we're looking at ADHD diagnostic criteria, 6 or more symptoms are generally indicating that that person is experiencing many more challenges in those areas than is typical for their age. So for Alex, both Alex's parent and their teacher indicates at or above threshold for both inattention and hyperactivity, impulsivity. And both parent and teacher are also indicating functional impact in overall school performance, including for reading, writing, and mathematics. So, interpreting these case results, what this suggests to me is that Alex is demonstrating generally age-appropriate cognitive skills, although working memory is a clear area of challenge. It's helpful to consider when attention is a concern that working memory can benefit from careful interpretation. We have to ask, are we seeing actual working memory capacity here, or are we seeing working memory performance under conditions where attention is not well regulated? Functionally, both are important and can look very similar in the classroom. It's difficult to hold information in mind if you're not attending fully to it when it is presented to you. The reading difficulties are also meaningful, but particularly seem to be apparent when tasks require that sustained attention, efficiency, and fluency. Alex is often off task and benefits from repetition and redirection and loses focus as task demands increase. So adding that screener was really important for me with this assessment. What the screener added was showing me that the results on the Vanderbilt are that Alex's results exceeded that clinical threshold across both home and school environments. And this is pointing to ADHD-related difficulties being a key factor affecting Alex's ability to attend, learn, persist and engage with learning. So at this point, I would be very cautious about diagnosing a specific learning disorder as the primary explanation for Alex's academic challenges, but instead would recommend supporting attention and learning in tandem and monitoring Alex's academic process once attention supports are in place. In terms of diagnosis, I would probably have a discussion with Alex's family and suggest that they have a number of paths that they can take to further explore attentional difficulties. It's certainly possible for a range of health professionals to undertake a comprehensive ADHD assessment that might involve additional questionnaires and that might involve structured interviews, whether that is a pediatrician or child and adolescent psychiatrist, or whether that's a psychologist, for example, might be something for the family to consider. But certainly at this point, I would be making recommendations to support Alex in the classroom with attention. So feedback, feeding the results back is a really key part of the process for me. I'm bringing everything together that I've observed and the information that I've gathered through assessment, and I talk about it with the client and the family. I like to approach feedback collaboratively. I think the assessment findings are most useful when families can recognise the young person in the results and also leave with a clearer idea of what to do next. I will almost always write a report when I've done an assessment, and there's a lot of different opinions about what a report can look like. But I prefer to talk through results with families before finalising my recommendations. That allows the recommendations to be personalised and checked against the child's own context, including social and emotional factors. Where possible, I like to link results back to what parents, teachers, or a young person themselves has already noticed. For example, if a child says to me, "I can never think of what to write in the classroom," and the assessment shows difficulty on an essay writing task, I will link those together and say, "Yes, I can see that this is an area that takes a lot more effort for you. Here's some strategies that might help." That makes sense is some of the best feedback that I can hear in a feedback session. I think the goal is not only to explain the scores, although we do need to do that, but the goal is to build a shared understanding of what those scores actually mean for the person. And I think feedback is best when it leaves families with a clearer understanding and a plan. So, from my case study now to broader clinical use, I think that Alex's case study was a good example of clarifying diagnostic questions during the assessment. A screener can help answer that as part of a referral question. And it also helped to really explore differential diagnosis during the assessment. But screeners can also serve other purposes in clinical practice, depending on the question being asked. So I'm going to briefly talk through 6 ways that I use or think about using screeners, from one child or parent in the room through to whole populations.